Welcome back to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Romans Education Part 1, and this is session 38. And I guess when we left off, we had this big discussion, so I'm not sure where we left off. But when we left off, I guess I was going to talk about the difference between the living and the labor, and I do want to say that on the tape, and that the living is what you did. Fell down again, didn't it? The living is what you do outside of the time that you're assembled together, but you still do it within the members of this group. The labor is something that will be done when this group assembles themselves together, and it is in line with an operation that your Heavenly Father wants accomplished within a group of believers, within the saints, as they are assembled together. Do you remember back when we talked about the spiritual gifts, and I talked about the different operations that God had going, had things that He wanted to get accomplished? He's not through doing stuff. He still wants to get things done. I know it's really easy for people to take a look at that and say, well, God's not really doing anything today. And if all you're really looking for is for Him to make it rain because you live in West Texas, or you're looking for something like that, you might come to the conclusion that God's not doing anything. But if you can get past the physical things to what He's really doing, which is the work in your inner man, listen, to conform you to the image of His Son, that's the work He is doing. And He's very interested in that. And it's too bad more believers aren't interested in the real work of the dispensation of grace. Well, never mind. I'm going to get on that hobby horse. Okay. It's just too bad. Because that's the important work. More important than making it rain is conforming you to the image of His Son. More important than that. All right. Sorry. We just come down here and we see all those signs on those church billboards. Pray for rain. You do realize it rains in places in the world where no one lives? You do realize that. Wonder how come it rained there? I got a news flash for you. That's the way weather works. Because when it does rain, oh, see, I'm going to get off on this, aren't I? Because, we're all praying for rain, praying for rain, praying for rain. And then when it does rain, it rains what? 1/10 of an inch. Well, God gave us rain, but we need some more. Well, you should have asked Him, can we have 3 1/4 inches? Because if you're really thinking that works, be specific. Yes? Well, wait, He can do 1/10 of an inch, but He can't do 3 1/4? Is that what you're telling me? Come on. And you know what? Really, I love this. The guy that's telling me that God's doing that's wearing these to see the verse he's using to preach. Okay, I'm done. Lost every internet listener right there. That's great. Okay. So there's a context to that which is good and that which is evil. And what that is saying to us is, did I finish this on the tape? Y'all do this to me all the time. You get me off track. This is your fault. The labor is in the confines of when this group meets together. Okay, I finished that. Okay. So here's what this is. We have to find a way to start thinking about when I hear of some, and see, it's a very broad, evil, but a very narrow, happening to someone within this group. I hate that. And by the way, I understand that lots of times things happen to people because they did something that wasn't very bright. But your Father still doesn't want you to look at that and be indifferent to it. In other words, I'm not saying people can't do something stupid and learn a lesson out of it, but we're not supposed to stand back and go, hey, you know what? You shouldn't have done something stupid. That's the break, so too bad for you. That's not the attitude we're supposed to have about it. I realize there's a difference between suffering for something that's not your fault and then suffering because you just didn't think. But the rest of this body is not supposed to look at that and go, well, if it's this one, I feel sorry for you, but if it's that one, well, I don't. We can't be indifferent as members of the body. Have you ever hit your thumb with a hammer? The rest of your body is not going, well, you shouldn't have gotten in the way. This hand, have you ever reached over to grab the hand to stop the blood from flowing out from under the nail? And this hand is going, no, that was stupid. I'm not helping. No, I'm staying over here. No, don't make me, no. Your body doesn't do that. Yeah, it was stupid. I can remember my younger years when I was more prone to express my stupidity. And, listen, there's a lot of stupid things I did. But I tell you what, no matter what I did, you ever hit your head, got mad? I mean, never mind. Just, you hit your head and you get mad and you hit the thing you hit your head on, now your hand hurts. And even though your hand hurts and you know what, your whole body knows it was stupid, it still goes up and grabs a hand and goes, well, let's look at it. You know what I'm saying? All right. So we got to start doing that. And so this is the thinking. That's what verse 9b is about. Okay. Let's see. And that way, let's just read what George Crabbe says about cleave. Persons in the moral sense cleave to each other by never parting company. And I really like why he said it, the way he said it that way, because when good is happening to someone in our assembly, let's forget the evil for a second. When good is happening, we ought to do everything in our power to have that continue on. We ought to be right there in favor of that. It just, you understand? If something is happening that's good, I've never had my back hurt and I laid down and I thought, oh, that feels so much better, and now my arm is saying, the back doesn't deserve to get that relief. If that's hurting, my whole body feels better when it stops. That's the way we have to get, and I think I've illustrated that enough ways. So what are we going to call this? What is the second thing? Kindness. And we even used that word, and we looked it up, loving kindness. And it doesn't matter to me which one you want to use, because both of them are describing the things that are going to be contained in verses 9 and 10. And this word kindness, let me show you this. Oh, I'm sorry, that was just good. I almost got ahead of myself. In this context has to do with this. Things that tend to the happiness or prosperity of another, that are conducive to the well-being, health, advantage, benefit, or profit of another saint in the assembly. If something is profitable to you, if it's a good thing, then everybody here ought to rejoice in that. And if something is happening that's not a good thing, everybody in this assembly, the thinking that ought to be in our mind is, I don't like that thing that's happening to this other member of our body. And now we have to translate that into some kind of conduct and behavior. Now look, this is why I keep harping on this. Before we can do this, before we can, even if I tell you what it is, even if I describe the godly labor to you, when we meet together, then in fact we're going to see this in verse 10, that there is a godly labor that we're going to be able to perform when we're right here assembled together, and only when we're assembled together. But before we can ever do that labor, this thinking has to already have now affected the way we're living every day. And if it's not, you can't jump from here to here. That won't work. You have to have the experience of this before now you can take that and hone it into doing something in your Father's business that accomplishes His operation. You know what it would be like? It would be like reading about and learning and hearing about riding a bike, never actually getting on the bike, and then saying, you know what, I'm going to get a job now, being a courier downtown. I'm going to ride my bike and drop off important documents. If you skipped the conduct of it, you're not going anywhere on your bike. You'll just get run over. Is everybody following what I'm saying? So this has got to be in us. That's why I know it looks slow, but this is a process where it's not just information. I can't just say, we got to start thinking it, and then you got to start doing it. Now, here's the labor. Let's go do that. We can't do that. That labor is only going to come after we've been living it. And I can't tell you how to live it. You've got to decide, this is how I'm going to put that into practice. And then you've got to go do it, because good intentions won't give you the practical experience with this that we have to have. By the way, this is going somewhere. I guess I could mention it this way. Do you know, let me just go a little further, and then I'll do this work, because I'm dying to get there. This all translates into something, all of the labor, by the way, this pattern for edification, you know what that is. Well, you know, we saw it here in the first part. I'm going to break it down for you over here. You're going to see it in the second part. From here on in Paul's epistles, he's going to give you the godly thinking, the godly living, and the godly labor. He's going to repeat that over and over and over, because you know how to think. Now that's going to affect your conduct. And then once you've been doing that, he's going to tell you, and by the way, here's how you're actually going to labor with me in my business. And what you're doing, the reason that's labor, is it's not just an operation that I'm doing right now with you in the dispensation of grace, but what you learn to do right here in this godly labor translates directly into something you're going to be called on to do in the creature. I'm going to show you two of those today. It'll be the very first thing that we have to do before we can deliver the creature from the bondage of corruption. Before we do that, and it's contained in the godly labor that was contained in verses 3 through 8. And if we can't get that done here, we're never going to get it done in the creature. Well, let me say it like this. It's going to get done in the creature, but it'll be done by people who got it done by looking at the doctrine and the doctrine working in them, and they put that into their conduct and behavior, their living, and from that they were able to labor with God here, and he's going to look at those people and say, I'm going to put you in the position up there now to be able to do this up there, because that's a direct translate. Do you understand? This is not busy work. This is not God saying, I'm going to give you some godly labor. This just kind of keep y'all busy and keep you out of trouble. He's saying, this very thing that I'm having you labor with here really is my business, and it has a direct one-to-one translation to the creature. So if you've been ever sitting there in your seat and wondering, what are we going to be doing up there? I'm telling you about it. And that ought to make us go, oh, well, I need this. I don't think you're saying you don't, but you understand. Okay. So, give me this. Okay, Corinthians. Isn't this what we already read? We're talking about this abhorring evil and cleaving to good, and rather one member suffer, all the members suffer with it, right? Or one member be honored, all the members rejoice with it. This is not a new concept. We've seen this kind of thing in Corinthians, and now we're looking at it in Romans. See, they didn't get the Romans doctrine. I mean, it was given to them, but they didn't do it. And so when Paul goes back to Corinthians to correct them, you know what he's doing? He's bringing them right back to something they should have gotten in the Romans doctrine. So I'm showing it to you now in Romans, but I'm reminding you that we saw it over there in Corinthians. Okay, now I've kind of lost my place in my notes, so I think the next thing is that Webster's 1928 dictionary definition for kindness, because that's the word that we have used to encapsulate this feature of godly love. Goodwill, benevolence, that benevolence, there should be a semicolon I just cut off. That temper or disposition which delights in contributing to the happiness of others, which is exercised cheerfully in gratifying their wishes, supplying their wants, or alleviating their distresses. Kindness ever accompanies love. Good definition. That's the kind of godly kindness that we're talking about being added to our selflessness as that second major feature. And that's the kind of love that we're supposed to have for each other. Now, does that mean that because you read this verse that suddenly you're just going to wake up and suddenly you're just going to be filled with kindness for everybody? This is something that you have to do. You have to decide that, and that has to be the product of your thinking and then the product of your living as well. Let me just show you. I gave you a bunch of verses last time on the loving kindness aspect of this. I want to show you one other. It's not a verse that we looked at. Now I'm just going to show you this one passage. This is Isaiah 63, where he says, I will mention the loving kindness of the Lord. By the way, this chapter starts out, in the first 6 verses, he's talking about the great and terrible day of the Lord at the second advent of Jesus Christ and the things that are going to take place. Right after he talks to them about that day of wrath, here's what he introduces. He says, I will mention the loving kindness of the Lord. Because as the prophet talks about the wrath that's going to be poured out, people, especially Israel, they would get to thinking, oh, well, God's just a God of wrath. And that's what people think. So Isaiah says, I will mention the loving kindness of the Lord and the praises of the Lord according to all that the Lord has bestowed on us, and the great goodness, I want you to remember that, toward the house of Israel. The great goodness. Do you remember what we're supposed to do? Abhor evil, cleave to that which is good. All right? And it says, which he hath bestowed on them according to his mercies and according to the multitude of his loving kindnesses. For he said, surely they're my people, people that will not lie. So he was their Savior. In all their affliction, he was afflicted. You understand what that's saying? When they were hurting, he's saying, I was hurting. And the angel of his presence saved them. In his love and in his pity, he redeemed them, and he bare them and carried them all the days of old. Now, there's something I want to point out about that. In fact, I'm going to take you somewhere else, because when I read that, it says, in their affliction, he was afflicted. And I thought, I wonder what he was referring to. So I ran the references on that affliction, and here's what I found. In Genesis 15, this is where Abraham is told something that's going to happen to his descendants. It says, and he said to Abram, know of a surety that thy seed shall be a stranger in a land that is not theirs, and shall serve them, and they shall afflict them 400 years. Do you know what country that was? That was Egypt. And then I found that companion in Exodus 1:12, but the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were grieved because of the children of Israel. That's the only time I saw the word afflicted that was used with regard to Israel. And God says, when you were afflicted, I was afflicted. When that happened to you, I felt that. According to his loving kindness. You know what he was doing? Abhorring the evil. That's what he was doing for them. Now back to Isaiah 63, just to emphasize, in all their affliction he was afflicted, and I'm glad it says the rest of the verse, because he didn't just say, hey, when I heard what was happening to you, I felt really bad about that. That thinking translated into a conduct. It wasn't just, I feel bad for you. I did something. What did he do? And it says, the angel of his presence saved them, redeemed them, bare them, and carried them. That's doing something. That's thinking, going into his conduct and behavior. This is exactly the way God does this, and now we're being called on to do that same thing. And just like I was telling you before, that loving kindness, of all the times, 30+ times that is mentioned in your Bible, every single time we find loving kindness, it is an attribute that is attributed to God alone. No man was ever said to have loving kindness. And now you get to Romans chapter 12 and verses 9 and 10, and we find out that in addition to the godly selflessness that we're supposed to have, because we're all part of a body and have been dealt the measure of faith, now we're supposed to have God's brand of kindness, loving kindness that no man has ever had before, but now sons are called on to have that. And that's not just an honor, but that's a necessary thing that we're going to have as the body of Christ when we get up there. Okay, back to Romans chapter 12 and verse 9. Let love be without dissimulation, abhor that which is evil, cleave to that which is good. Now, unless you've got a question about that verse, I'm going to move you to verse 10. Everybody kind of get what that's about? And what you're looking in verse 9, that is the godly thinking. Now give me verse 10, Trent. Be kindly affectioned one to another in brotherly love, in honor, preferring one another. And I might as well just lay it out for you like this. The first part of verse 9, be kindly affectioned one to another with brotherly love. That is your godly living. And when that gets done, there is a way in which when this group is assembled together, we are going to produce a godly labor, and that's at the, I'm sorry, that should have been 10A, not 9. 10B is going to produce the godly labor, and that is in honor, preferring one another. And we are going to talk about what that is. But in the remaining minutes that we've got left in this section, what I want to do is I want you to see that what this is. In fact, let me do 9A, that let love be without dissimulation. Because if we were to go up here, 9A, that is the exhortation. Let love be without dissimulation. Here's how I want you to think about each other. Abhor that which is evil, the evil that happens to the other members of this assembly, and cleave to that which is good. That's how I want you to think about each other. And then you're going to take that thinking, and it's going to translate into verse 10, which is, be kindly affectioned one to another. When we come back after the break, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you, this is really great. Kindly affection. Do you ever wonder why he says it that way and he didn't just say, be affectionate one with another? Why didn't he just say that? Why say kindly affectioned? The use of those two words together is supposed to guide your thinking about something. And it's something that I think is pretty incredible. So what we'll do is we'll stop here. We'll take our break. I said we'll stop here. Let me just make sure I don't have anything else to give you. And then we'll come back and we'll take up with the next section.